Our modern world is full of distractions. Advertisers trying to sell us the ideal lifestyle, extravagant homes, luxury cars, always trying to convince us that we need more and more and more. I just wanted to fucking escape from all that chaos. Sometimes I want to sit with a cup of tea, stare out the window, and just watch the clouds drift by. To understand what that feeling of being at home really is within myself. So I was born and raised in Mississauga. I have one older sister, so it was the four of us with my parents living in a 3-story home. Very standard, kind of suburban house. It's funny, my parents went through high school in Toronto and they hated Toronto and wanted to get out as soon as possible to raise their family. And I ended up moving to Toronto the first opportunity I could. I actually moved into my apartment in 2013 in the Yonge and Eglinton neighborhood. It's one of the fastest growing neighborhoods in North America. At first, when I first moved in, there was a park right in front of me. So when I'd lay in bed at night, I could see the trees, and it's very rapidly started changing. Where the park used to be, they cut all those trees down and built a condo. By the time I moved out, they were still in the process of building a condo on the west side of my building. They hadn't even started building one on the east side yet, and they were going to add 4 floors to my building. Once that condo started going up, the second one, I really lost my patience for it. Not only was the noise unbearable, because they're digging underground, it's kind of vibrating the whole building. So you can play music as loud as you want, but you can still feel the reverberations coming from the floor. I was getting really bad migraines. And when they're digging, all of this dust is getting kicked up. So there was a point where I couldn't even see out my windows anymore. And that dust was giving me awful allergies. So I was constantly sneezing. I was covered in hives all of the time. And then when we were all in lockdown, I had no place to escape. I couldn't just work at a coffee shop that day. I was really stuck there. So that's when I seriously started considering, okay, I need to find a new place to live. My parents were constantly talk about how insane the difference was between when they were my age and they bought a house pretty easily. And my parents were not wealthy at all. They were really struggling and, trying to make ends meet with, their first daughter, but they were able to buy a house pretty easily. And now the cost of that house is times 10, maybe even more. So my dad was always warning me that you're never going to be able to afford a house. My first thought was really, I'm going to have to keep paying rent. I'm going to just have to find a new apartment. So I was just looking at other apartments, but I also didn't realize how expensive those were too. Because I lived in the same apartment for 8 years, they kept my rent pretty low. So I was paying a really, really good rate for what I had. Actually, if I moved out and then moved right back into the same building, I would be spending $600 more per month. A friend of mine was actually very interested in converting a van and, being on the go and kind of traveling while she was working and being able to work from anywhere. So she introduced me to a YouTube channel called Exploring Alternatives, which is actually, they're a Canadian couple who started this channel, and they look at all sorts of different living structures, whether you live in a van, maybe a boat, and they have many videos on tiny houses. But my apartment where I was living was about 400 square feet. And a lot of these tiny houses are between like 200, 300 square feet. And that's with, you know, my bedroom is a loft that's above my living room. So you're kind of making use of that vertical space too. So when I saw that on these videos, I immediately thought, oh, I could very happily, very easily live in a space of that size. And I was just so happening to watch that YouTube channel that I was mentioning, Exploring Alternatives. And they did this video on this woman and her husband and their son who lived in a tiny house in Ontario, not too far away from here.
What you see when you come in the double doors is our beautiful galley kitchen. Living in a tiny house, you don't exactly have the largest amount of space, so this is completely catered to us as a 3-person family or a couple with a toddler. So, you know, we left space here when designing to dry dishes.
I'm a teacher at a land-based Montessori adolescent school.
And I am...
She mentioned in the video that she is a consultant and she helps other people who are looking to live in a tiny house to actually achieve that. And I was just so excited when I watched that video. I was like, I need to get in touch with this woman. So I checked out her website. I got in touch with her. We had a few phone calls or like video calls over Zoom. And we just instantly like connected. We had so much in common. She was such just a wonderful energy to be around. And we've been friends ever since.
We've always lived a good life. We're very privileged to say that. Our relationship has been really strong. We've been together since our early 20s, and but that doesn't mean we haven't dealt with our fair share of stress. Working a lot, making sacrifices, working jobs we didn't want to, living in houses we didn't want to, and a lot of that really led to our downsizing journey. I actually ended up giving birth to my son Bodhi 6 weeks early, and I attribute that to working really hard during my pregnancy and not listening to my body, and working to kind of prove something that I could. I actually sprained my pubic bone and strained my round ligament, so I actually ended up injuring myself and then taking time off, and the day after I stopped working is when my water broke. So hard to have your body fail you because you work so hard.
We were sitting around a fire, and I can't remember the circumstances, but I remember it was very out of the blue when I said to Bianca, I want to sell everything that we own and live in a yurt in the forest. And I'm dead set on this, and don't laugh, because I can't do this anymore. I can't live in this condo. I can't spend another Christmas away from you. We need a lifestyle change, and I think that we together can make this happen, and I really want to make this jump. And you actually took that comment out of the blue really seriously, and we got to talking about it, and then we went for a walk in the forest, and we got chatting, and then, okay, let's make this jump, let's do this. And for the next 6 or 7 or 8 months, it was nothing but tiny house. The journey of searching was never ending. You can get down that rabbit hole for forever. We looked at building our own tiny house, which I pretty quickly realized that was out of the question. Or we looked at having somebody build it for us. We looked at modular homes. We looked at shipping them from the States. We looked at driving down to the States and towing them up here. And after all that, after months and months and months of all of those options, we finally came across this house on Kijiji. Are we gonna buy our new house off of Kijiji from this?
Yes, we are.
Then it was exactly what we wanted in terms of the layout and the color, and we found it in Quebec, and the couple that owned it was absolutely lovely, and they were thankfully the communication was great. They had our same values. We took a road trip out there, all the way out to Quebec with Bodhi to go and stay in it for the weekend. We got to chat with the family, and we loved it. We fell in love with it, and we went home, and immediately put our house up for sale
Yeah, the next day.
the next day.
And we're like, this is happening.
When I was searching on YouTube, just doing my research, I stumbled upon this video talking about how to legally live in a tiny house in Ontario, because there are a lot of bylaws and regulations that you have to navigate around. And his video is very informative, and I found it very helpful. And he was actually the builder that I ended up going with. I did try to Google around like tiny house builders, specifically in Ontario, and there were very, very few. His website was at the top of the list, and then there were two other ones, and I actually reached out to both of them through their website, and I never heard back from the other two. So it seemed like they were my only option. I know there are builders in Alberta and Quebec, but I thought about the cost of then transporting that house to Ontario. So it seemed like it was my only option at the time. But I knew that they had experience. They had built at least 10 tiny houses before. And before that, they were just doing renovations for like, standard homes. So I felt confident that they had a lot of experience and could do the job. The first meeting that I had with that builder was on Zoom, and I actually prepared a whole presentation because it's kind of part of the work that I do. It's the best way for me to communicate all of my ideas. So I talked about, priority number one, I need to live in a place where I have a good internet connection so that I can work from home. I talked about all my needs, what things I like to do, like my lifestyle, right? Like I love cooking, so I want a standard size kitchen. I like to do yoga, so I need enough space on the floor to do that. So I kind of prioritized, how do I live and how can I really design every aspect of the layout around that. So I had that conversation on webcam, and then I did meet with them in person to look at some of the tiny houses they had already built so I could walk around in one. This home is actually modeled off of one of their model homes that they kind of have at their warehouse for you to see. There was no loft, but otherwise it's pretty much the exact same layout. So when I was finally able to walk through it in person, and I brought my dad with me, and we were both really excited. So after that point, I signed a contract with them. I had to give them a deposit. And then we started the design process. So it was all 3D renderings and blueprints at that stage.
That was cool.
We also had to convince people, your family, your friends, the bank, that you're going to get out of the market. This one thing that is almost impossible to get into that we were so fortunate enough to get into in the first place. But are you crazy? The banks were all telling us, people were telling us, nobody does this. You can't get out of the market. You're never going to be able to get back in. This is a bad idea. Some people were very supportive, but we had a lot of resistance too. And then, but if it's either that or continue doing what we were doing, and let's face it, we couldn't afford to move out of our condo and into something bigger. We were already stretched so thin. So I feel like that's a big part, something that's common in life. In order to make these drastic lifestyle changes, you really have to be desperate in a way. You really have to be at the end of your rope with things and that motivates you to take such drastic measures, because there's no other option if you want to improve your life.
The space conversation is a very prevalent conversation. People always ask us, you know, do you have enough space for Bodhi? Do you have enough space for yourselves? All of these different things. I mean, we live in 240 square feet. And the answer that I give them, and it's not because I've created this answer, it's because we always knew that this would happen, is that we have access to nature now. We don't live in 900 square feet where Bodhi has his own bedroom. We live in 240 square feet with 6 acres. And not everyone who finds their you know, their forever tiny home spot will have access to that much, but that's our journey. And we knew that we would be an outdoor family. We spend all of our time outside, weather permitting, and even weather not permitting. We live in Canada, right? You have so much property. How many acres do you have? Do you know? 6. Can you say 6 acres? 6 acres. Do you have chickens?
Chicken.
Two lonely chickens left up there.
I see one.
And I think it also kind of forces you to deal with situations, whether they're positive or negative. You're in such a small space, you're together. You don't have each your own rooms and your own office. And I mean, there's definitely some upsides to that as well, but kind of forces you to spend time with one another. And anybody who has a toddler knows, like, or kind of feels sometimes like, I just want to storm out, go to my own room, or put my son in his own room, or go into the basement. We don't really have those options. So like everything that we deal with is magnified, and that could be really positive. We have a lot more positive, meaningful family time in here. But also when things are really bad, or when people are really sick, that's also really magnified.
Oh, so bad.
And it tests our limits sometimes, but it's also taught us how to communicate more effectively. I can't just storm off and go to the basement. I can't just storm off and have my own separate piece of the house to escape these problems. And it's really hard, but it taught us to become more effective communicators.
Big time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once I signed the contract with the builder and I had to pay that deposit, I'm very privileged and fortunate that I had that money already in my savings account. So I was able to pay that. What I didn't know, or what I started to learn, is that a tiny house is not eligible for a mortgage. So I could not take out a mortgage like somebody would if they were paying off a regular house. So my builder did offer financing, but I didn't want to be tied to my builder in a long-term relationship. So to be totally honest, my parents took out a line of credit and I am paying them off. So that's the only way I could find like a financing model that would work. But it's something very important for tiny homeowners to consider, because if you don't have a good credit score, it's a very strong barrier that may stand in the way.
I could see all the pieces fitting together. I knew we could accomplish this, but Bianca, with her background in managing huge weddings and expectations and managing things under pressure, she was actually the one that was able to get us insurance, make the contacts, do all those nitty-gritty things that it were just far beyond my reach. So in terms of getting here, it was definitely a team effort.
Yeah, I don't take no for an answer in most things, so it took me calling about 60 insurance companies to finally get someone to say, oh, yeah, okay, I see this. And that's just something that would have just driving knives into the brain. So we definitely played to our strengths, and my strengths is to just make it happen, figure it out. You're very amazing with follow through, whereas sometimes I'm not. I can figure it out, but then someone else has got to finish it.
One of the biggest challenges while the house was being built, so during that whole year that the builders were doing their thing, I, behind the scenes, was trying to find a place to actually park the house. A lot of tiny home owners that you see or hear about have family that they can park their house, in their backyard, or they have a mutual friend, and I don't know anyone who owns the land. So I was putting ads on Kijiji, classified ads websites, Facebook Marketplace, just trying to connect with as many people as possible. And I did meet a couple, and they had a really nice property. But I really didn't know how to navigate working with the local planning division to actually legally put down this house. I was trying to read some of the bylaws online on my own, and it was so complicated. Even though, English is my first language, it was like reading a totally different language. All this legal jargon was very complicated. Before I found this place where I am now, I honestly thought I would have to sell this house before even moving into it because I just didn't know where I would put it. So it was extremely stressful. There were many sleepless nights, lots of crying, lots of anxiety attacks. But now that I'm here, I don't think I would take it back. Like I can't imagine ever going back to the city.
How did we feel when we first moved in?
It was like a dream. And we had been through so much in that past year, including when we bought the tiny house, we had to have it towed here and it broke down on the side of the 401. And in the middle of a long weekend at 2 a.m, and I was out there from 2 to 5 a.m. We've sunken everything into this tiny home. And I remember driving by it and there's our tiny house just on the side of the highway with 2 blown tires. And I was so scared and it was so stressful. We ended up paying $12,000 to get it towed here. So that was just like the last hurdle that we had to get here. But when we saw it pulling in, it had been like we ran a marathon. That was like the second chapter of this journey when the house was here. It's like, okay, now we got to get to work. And we spent the next year figuring out, like, everything that you see in this house has a purpose, has a place, and it had not always looked like this. And it was really frustrating to try to figure every little square inch in this place and how to hook up the water and the fireplace and the gray water in the bathroom. But it was...
So I think it's to say that we didn't have this plan. And the plan was that the house would get here, and day 2 we'd hook up the water, and day 3 we'd hook up the propane, and day 4 we'd have all the furniture in the house, and everything was painted, and then by day 7 we were living tiny. It was not that way. The first real hurdle was selling our house and figuring all that out. Second real hurdle was getting the house here and arranging for appropriate insurance, and we could hook everything up appropriately. And then from there, it was finding people to help us do that. And so when we got it here, we didn't even have running water for 3 months.
Huh.
3 whole months we didn't have running water, but there's a main building on this property that we were using. And so we were almost camping. We slept on a mattress on the floor, and we didn't even have our living room set up until the next February.
My first day here was such a relief. The house was put down here in early September, but there were still many things that needed to happen after that. I needed to get a satellite internet connection. I needed to get water in. It took much longer until I had wastewater, like a septic, out. So actually for the first week that I lived here, my water just drained out into a big bucket. And every morning, like after I would take a shower, I'd have to walk outside and pick up the bucket and carry it to the river and dump it out in the river. Little things you take for granted that you just, water just goes down the sink and you don't have to think about it. And because, to be honest, my builder would not give me a date for when this house would be delivered, it was kind of like, okay, we're ready tomorrow. We can give it to you tomorrow. So I had to try to call the propane company to set up the propane tanks, and the earliest they could come was in 4 weeks. And I really didn't want to have to live with my parents for another 4 weeks. So I called a bunch of different propane companies, and I found one that was able to come within a couple of days. But when they arrived, they found out that the way the propane pipes were set up in my house was not done properly. So then a technician had to come, literally rip the whole wall off the side of the house, take out some of the insulation, redo the pipes, put everything back in. Then I had to call the propane company again. So I was kind of in and out of this home. I was able to work here because I had electricity and I had internet, but I really couldn't sleep here. I couldn't stay here because I didn't have hot water. My toilet runs on propane, so I couldn't use the toilet either. So the first night that I was finally able to actually sleep here, it felt very surreal. It didn't really set in yet that, okay, I'm finally here and this is my home. It felt like I was on a long vacation, kind of. I couldn't sleep at all for the first few nights because it didn't feel like home yet. And there were still a lot of things missing. You know, I was still living out of boxes because I didn't have my shelves up yet. So it was a long, I would say a whole month until I really settled in and started to feel comfortable here.
Allison, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited that you booked your appointment. I have always loved helping people. I find a really, really, really positive personal gain from helping people. And I think that's why I gave 13 hours of my day to make someone else's day the most special, most perfect experience of all time, because I could take ownership over that. And for other people, they are where we were, and I know that I can help them see a different path. I think a big piece of this conversation is building community. I mean, there are so many isolated individuals, people who are doing for them and perhaps only their family. And for us, we have built this community. So when there are people coming, in and out of our driveway, or they're coming to see the tiny house, or we need to lean on somebody because we need someone to come feed our chickens, we've built that. And so when I talk to other people about what their lives could look like in this type of living situation, the biggest piece of the conversation I talk about is needing a village and needing that community and not being so isolated. People build big homes with big fences and they keep everybody out, and that's fine. Maybe when you're 80, you're not going to have anyone around you then, and that's there's nothing wrong with people who are there. But for us, we have found so much value out of our community, and so I really love to show people what that looks like.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who are looking for lifestyle and sustainable living, in terms of how to start a garden, or, the biodegradable products that we use, or how to live a little bit more non-toxic lifestyles. But honestly, mainly people just say, what are the bylaws? What tiny house can I live in, and how do I make it happen? There's so much contradictory information out there where bylaws don't support temporary structures, and then tiny homes can also be built not to code. And so the issue now is people are building tiny homes that are not built to code and that are not certified appropriate.
My name is Philip Bradley. I'm the founder of Little Creek Homes. We're a mini home manufacturer. And we've been building mini homes now for about 3 years, but not underneath our own brand. We were actually building multi-million-dollar luxury homes for the last 20 years. And only when my daughter asked me what I knew about tiny homes, then we started investigating it. We realized it was a market that was underserved, and frankly, we could bring something to the table. So we've been operating as Little Creek Homes for about a year now. When we started looking for mini homes or tiny homes for my daughter, I was incredibly disappointed with the quality that we were seeing. Virtually nobody was building to Ontario Building Code standards. Virtually nobody was in a professional facility. They were always in abandoned warehouses or barns using leftover materials. And I said to my daughter, there's no way we're putting you in one of these homes. That grew into one of those manufacturers saying to us, help us. You build multi-million-dollar homes, high-quality luxury homes. Help us get there. So our first 17 homes, were ones that we were building for other people, helping them get from where they were to the quality and standards which we hope are going to become standard in the tiny home community. When we transitioned from literally the last house we did was an $8 million home. into $150,000 luxury tiny homes or mini homes, there's a very steep learning curve there. The reality is that although it's all Ontario Building Code, there are a lot of interesting little quirks that are required in a small space. Everything has to be utilized that much more efficiently. Everything has to be done on a smaller scale. So even the heating, the air conditioning, the movement of air, the movement of people inside of the space has to be done on a infinitely more regimented scale. So Ontario Building Code does encompass literally every spectrum of building a residential structure. That's literally what and they really don't care what size it is, as long as it's bigger than 250 square feet up to 12,000. The same rules apply for all of them. But they have minimums, and those minimums quite often could be a challenge in the mini home marketplace for a builder and designer. A classic example is in Ontario. The Ontario Building Code stipulates that a bedroom has to be 6 feet 11 inches tall to be called a bedroom. Well, in a lot of these mini homes, it doesn't get anywhere near that, so it's not classified as a bedroom. Lofts also are very, very popular with a lot of mini home manufacturers or tiny home manufacturers, and they call the lofts bedrooms. You're not legally allowed to do that because, number one, it's not 6 foot 11 inches, and most of them don't have egress windows or ventilation. All are requirements for the bedroom space. So the way a lot of them get around that is to say it's a loft, it's a storage area where you happen to keep a mattress. And the building codes are there for a reason. And the reason why a bedroom needs to be have access to what's called an egress window. If there's a fire and the main exit's blocked, how does someone get out? Well, you need an egress window. Egress windows have to be a certain width, how tall they are, and how far off the ground they are, how easily they are to open, what's the space behind them to get you out. All of those are stipulated in Ontario Building Code. So one of the biggest challenges our clients have when they come to us, they like the idea of going into a mini home. They like our designs, they like the luxury we put into them. The number one challenge the vast majority of them face is, where do I put it? And how do I legally put it there?
Nobody just has this how do you live in a tiny house manual. I mean, I do now, but, but that didn't exist a while ago because nobody makes money off of that. Banks don't make money, governments don't make money, municipalities don't make a lot of money. They could with the right framework. But yes, so you can't, unless you're willing to do an incredible amount of research. It's taken me 3 years to figure this out. And so it is really hard to go in there and figure it out.
Right from the federal, provincial, and municipal are all talking about the housing crisis and how do we resolve the housing crisis. Well, the answer's right here. But getting them to look at it in a way that they can change their bylaws is the most frustrating part about what we do. We handhold a lot of municipalities, and we're not blaming municipalities, we're not blaming councillors and so on. It's just they're dealing with inaccurate, outdated information, and they're worried or scared about being the first one to make a step. There are a lot of municipalities, including Toronto right now, that are looking at changing their bylaw definitions to allow it. But, by an example, I had a conversation with a Mississauga councillor just this past week. Wonderful conversation. And he really is one of those people that wants to see this happen. And he's going to try and make a lot of things happen for it to happen for his ward. But as he put it, he goes, most municipal councils are a myriad of cogs that all have to be turning and working at the same pace, in the same direction, for the simplest of little things to happen. And for that to happen is a monumental effort. Nobody wants to be first. Nobody wants to stick their neck out. Nobody wants to, seem as though they're going against the norm when it comes to these sort of things. Thankfully, a lot of municipalities are, And I think in the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to see a much wider acceptance from larger municipalities like Toronto and Mississauga and Kingston and Ottawa and so on. So we know that there's a massive excitement around the mini home market. And it's not just from one group. We are seeing obviously a very large influx from what I call young people, the under 30s, that today literally cannot afford a house. When I bought my first house in the early 90s, what I paid for it outright is not even the deposit for a house today. I think there's a lot more space for people like Little Creek Homes to come in, and we welcome competition as it is, because right now there's so much business that we can't handle it all, and we need other builders with the same mantra and mentality as us to really start getting into the game.
I've always been a very independent person since I was a kid. My parents always told me that I could really play by myself as a child for hours, and I didn't really need other people around me. I was very focused on whatever it was that I was doing. So it doesn't surprise me that I ended up creating my own business and really pioneering this whole tiny house movement. I didn't realize that I was one of the first people who were doing it in Ontario. But yeah, I love having things that took a lot of time and a lot of effort to, enjoy the fruits of my labor, right? Like, it took a lot of time to plant those seeds and nurture them and water them. And the process can be very stressful, but once you see what it's grown into, I also always think, what can I do next? What's the next thing that I can do? So with the business, I'm always trying to grow it, grow my team, and I really see my house the same way. So one of my goals for the spring, because I moved in right at the beginning of fall, is to start growing my own garden. I'm really excited to be able to grow some of my own food. I love cooking and making food for my friends. So being able to just pick that off of my own property and to cook it and to enjoy it, I think it's going to be something that's really exciting. But I have no gardening experience at all, so I'm going to have to learn a lot, and I'm really excited about that too.
I learned that we gambled on ourselves, and we took a risk, and I'm really proud of that. And I don't know where this is. I don't know how long we'll be here. I don't know where this is going to lead, but we did what was best for us and what was best for our family. And I think when I'm later in life, when we look back at this, however it ends up, we'll be so proud of ourselves. Nobody does this. I'm really proud of us, and it's made our relationships stronger in the life that we've been able to give my son, opposed to where we were before, no backyard. I'm so proud of that, and I think that's what I'll learn from this journey, is that life's really short, and it's not easy to make these big decisions, but if you believe in yourselves and you trust each other, you can make that jump. You can do really incredible things, and that's what I learned.
I learned to trust yourself. Trust yourself, trust your partner, trust the process, and have courage. If you want to live differently, you have to think differently. And if you want to think differently, you have to expose yourself to different information, different people, different journeys. I learned that we were capable of so much more than we ever thought we were. And I learned that you don't have to wait for someone else to do something to make it be okay. I learned that we have all the power in ourselves. We don't have to do what our parents did and their parents did and our forefathers did. We can make a different life for ourselves and a different life for Bodhi. The biggest reason we did this is because we find a very profound responsibility in creating a greener future for Bodhi. And if we didn't, at the end of the day, 20 years from now, he looked back at us and he said, well, Mommy, what did you do? Look at this world. What did you do? It's a dumpster. And we can now confidently say, well, we did everything we could. Right? Right, buddy?
ما ترحمني سري för min jag kaluma fiet kör mi leme saram alvin kos kur mali sana malaki